This video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thanks for letting me do this for so long. Oh my goodness gracious me, it's finally happening! After years of waiting for Nintendo to recognize that the sequel to Breath of the Wild is a game that I personally would like some more information on, Nintendo seemed to have settled on a release date for Tears of the Kingdom of 12th of May, so obviously we have to do something to celebrate that. So I've brushed the cobwebs off of Zelda month, something that has been a long time coming, given that the last one I made was in... oh my god, it was 10 years ago. Anywho, we're bringing Zelda month back, and there's no better place to start than by talking about some of the stuff I hate about these games. Yeah? Does that work? I'm sure we can make it work. We're going to start out fairly simple and inconvenient and gradually get worse as we go along, so it's fitting that we start with a spin-off title that many of you may have forgotten about, Hyrule Warriors. Certainly after Age of Calamity came out, this game seems to have been overshadowed a tad, but evidently, the first Hyrule Warriors did enough things right to warrant being ported from the Wii U to the Switch via a 3DS version. There's a lot of game to play here, and even when you complete the main story, there's a ton of extra stuff to tackle in the adventure mode, including all the DLC that the 3DS game got over time. It's a game that benefits a lot from playing what you want, enjoying yourself, and then getting out before it becomes overbearing. Which I guess hints at where we're going. I talked about it years ago, but there's no easier way to ruin your experience of Hyrule Warriors than to attempt to 100% this monster. Yeah, having a lot of stuff to do can be a benefit, but if you're genuinely aiming to do all of it and beat every mission with the best ranking, then you better be prepared to have any and all enjoyment of Hyrule Warriors poured down the drain. Yeah, it's fun in small doses, but that's like frying one egg. 100%ing Hyrule Warriors is like lining up a huge pile of raw egg shots and downing them one after another. Pretty soon, you're gonna hate anything to do with eggs. And the kicker? The core gameplay of Hyrule Warriors is fundamentally quite repetitive, and while that may become apparent in the story mode or in parts of adventure mode, across every mission in the game, it'll grind you down to a fine powder. I don't want to fight another King Dodongo, please! Anything but that. Ocarina of Time. What a masterful creation this game is, taking Zelda into the third dimension with flawless precision and definitely making zero mistakes along the way. I know what you think I'm going to say, and it likely has something to do with the water temple being overly complicated and spending more time pausing the game to slip your iron boots on and off than actually solving puzzles, but I've come to appreciate how non-linear this dungeon is and how well it uses 3D space. On the other end of the spectrum is the worst use of 3D space in the game, and rather than being a dungeon, it's actually just Hyrule Field itself. Yeah, this one comes with a bit of retrospection, since for the time, this sweeping intro shot that shows off Hyrule Field in all its majesty was very impressive, and a sign that Nintendo sure do know how to make 3D environments look nice. The problems have arrived since then, and for all its sprawling greenery and wide expanses, there sure is a whole load of nothing around here. You've got Lon Lon Ranch in the centre, Hyrule Castle at the top, and access to a few other areas around the edge, but most of Hyrule Field is filled with enemies or secret grottos and not a lot else, really. It actually works quite well when you're an adult because it is so lifeless and, you know, people dared. But as a child, it should have a lot more going on in it. I know the main hub of the overworld is often little more than a portal that you can use to travel between areas, but it is kind of shocking just how little there is to do in an area this large and with music so triumphant. The score is way too exciting for minutes of rolling or back hopping so that you don't spend your whole life in Hyrule Field. Do you reckon they died of boredom? Hey guys, real quick, my channel has been approved for YouTube memberships now, so if you fancy supporting my channel more directly, you can become a member for as little as £1 a month and gain access to some nifty perks, as well as being featured on my channel page. Hit the join button below this video if that sounds cool to you. Thank you, and let's get back to the video. So many Zelda games take too long to get going. When the highs are this high, it can be really annoying to have to wait a few hours to sit through tutorials or lethargic world building, especially if you're replaying one of these games with the knowledge that it does indeed get so much better than this after a while. The title of slowest Zelda opening has to go to Twilight Princess, which I'm hesitant to be too harsh with, since it's deliberately slow by design so that you become accustomed to Link's daily routine in Ordon Village and meet all of the characters, of which there are many. It goes on for so long that you almost become comfortable with normal life, just in time for King Bulblin and his cronies to kick this game into a very high gear. My question comes from wondering if there's no better way to start Twilight Princess, because damn, it does spin in places for ages. I know you need that contrast, and most Zelda games have some kind of slow-burning introduction to the world and the characters you'll be seeing a lot of in this game, but I'm sorry, but so many other Zelda games aren't this dull at the start. If you paid attention to any of the marketing, Twilight Princess promised realistic graphics and cutting-edge motion controls and incredible sword fights with monsters, and do you know what you get instead? Goats. Just a bunch of goats. There's some good scenes in here and some necessary tutorials, but I feel like this could have been a lot more streamlined. The good news is that once Twilight Princess gets going, it goes hard and fast for a long time. But damn, I really don't want to herd goats. I don't think I can adequately describe how much I don't want to do that. I'd rather talk to the naked chicken people. If I'm here to talk about Breath of the Wild, I'm sure you're hoping and expecting me to go on a rant about how busted weapon durability is and how Tears of the Kingdom has to change it or remove it or suffer the consequences. But nah. I never loved my weapons breaking all the time, but the only thing missing is a way to upgrade or repair your weapons. And if Totka does that, then we're all good. However, with all the lightning and shitty weather in those trailers, I guarantee you that we're going to have to deal with rain in the sequel, and in Breath of the Wild, rain meant slippery surfaces. And I really hated those. Yeah, so the weapon durability was ultimately a misguided attempt at realism, but this is so much worse with the rain. There are times when you're exploring Hyrule that you don't get into many fights, and in fact, most combat in Breath of the Wild is entirely optional. Exploration, I suppose, is situationally optional, but the game is built for you to explore every nook and cranny, so it stands to reason that you'd be running and jumping and climbing wherever possible. Rain serves as the biggest bump in the road since it moistens up vertical surfaces that causes Link to slide down every couple of steps, making climbing almost impossible and forcing you to either wait it out, find a flatter way of getting to your destination, or finding a campfire to sit at to move time ahead. You know, with a broken weapon you can always just use another weapon. Outside of Rivali's Gale, you don't have many fallback options when the heavens open. Link needs a rainy day plan. Or a ladder. I still remember a time when the world was obsessed with Nintendo remaking Majora's Mask. As soon as Ocarina of Time 3D came out, it felt like a similar kind of remake was possible with the other N64 Zelda game, and given how amazing a job Grezzo did with Ocarina of Time, a Majora's Mask remake given the same treatment would slap so hard. However, among certain crowds, Majora's Mask has a reputation of being one of the most challenging Zelda games, and I don't know if Grezzo agreed or if they were leaned on by Nintendo, because Majora's Mask 3D is a faint shadow of the original N64 game that dumbs far too much down for modern audiences, I suppose. Just kinda depressing to wait so long and have a whole fan campaign for a remake and... what the fuck? Yeah, I don't really know what happened with this game since every unique component of Majora's Mask that stood out for doing things different has been sanded down out of existence, with a preference for making life as easy as possible for new players. The issue, and it might be fairly obvious at this point, is that Majora's Mask was built from the start to be intriguing and not completely obvious. The main threat is this giant moon crashing to Earth. It's not an easy fix, you know. Despite this, the 3DS remake would have you believe that all the bosses come with obvious weak spots and Zora swimming is awkwardly slow now, and the ice arrows are now restricted to specific spots of water instead of all the water, and you quickly realise that Nintendo and Eiji Aonuma were terrified of putting off new players. At times, the changes are insulting, and as someone who's played this game once across, ironically, a 3-day time period, I haven't touched it again after 100%ing it. I don't need to see Giant Link wrestling a worm. No thank you. Oh my days, is there a lot of water in the Wind Waker. You know, for as much as I love this game, it is a little strange how reluctant it is to do much of its aquatic overworld beyond being the overworld. I know it's a GameCube game, and as soon as you allow Link to dive underwater, for example, you're at least doubling the workload of your developers and the console it's on, but the biggest, most iconic moments in the Wind Waker are typically found inside dungeons or on islands, and frankly, you could replicate most of these without a sea for an overworld. This is except for the biggest time sink that this game can offer, since if you ever did any exploring of the Great Great Sea, you might hear whispers of some kind of overarching quest involving Triumph Forks, which must be some kind of trident or just like some really victorious forks. Now though, this is one big quest to find the Triforce, and you better believe that you're going to be intimately familiar with every corner of this world by the time you're done. Whether you like it or not, fucko. So I kinda like the Triforce hunt in Wind Waker for relaxing the focus away from dungeons and bosses to a more casual and yet mandatory exploration of the world you're in, but I also completely understand that the pace of this game drops through the floor here. You're being forced to search for important objects at a time when all you've known are dungeons and epic fights with giant bosses, and having to slow that down to a crawl to become way too familiar with every corner of the Great Sea is very jarring. You need to gather together 8 pieces of the Triforce of Courage, which in the original can only be found in underwater treasure chests. So you also need to go find the 8 Triforce charts, which are scattered across the entire overworld. What's more, you can't read them right away, so you need to go visit Tingle and pay 398 rupees per chart for him to translate them. Fans of big numbers will be pleased to hear that paying for all 8 charts costs a grand total of 3,184 rupees, so better get saving, and you better find the wallet upgrades. And even worse, one of the Triforce charts is hidden on the ghost ship, so you need to go find the ghost ship chart so the ghost ship will stay solid enough for you to board it. And even worse, one of the Triforce charts is halfway down the Savage Labyrinth, and that's like a half an hour time sink on its own, and that's if you don't die. I like some of the scavenging aspect to the Triforce hunt, but there really are way too many steps to this part of the game. And even Wind Waker HD on the Wii U has you visiting all these locations. It's just that some of the charts are traded out for the actual piece of the Triforce. For me, this is excessive, and a sign that Wind Waker was overall a little light on content and dungeons. An extra dungeon instead would have been perfect, and that's what I'd like to order for any kind of remake in the future. You know, it'd be so much better. Over the years, my opinion of Skyward Sword has gone through basically every stage, to the point where I don't even know how I feel about it these days. Playing the Switch version helped my appreciation of the controls, but to be fair, my main issues were never with the motion controls, and more aimed at some of the corners that Skyward Sword cut in order to be more streamlined. You can defend the aimless plot and the lifeless overworld, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone defend the multiple fights with the Imprisoned, which is a boss that has the kind of name that would surely inspire some kind of epic confrontation for the ages, but nah. How about a boss fight with a lot of running, a lot of repositioning, and a whole lot of taking damage from his large squishy toes? It's like this game knows me and what I want! Honestly, if I fought the Imprisoned once in Skyward Sword, I'd probably be able to shake it off as a quirky nugget of enemy design and move on with my life in peace. But sadly, the people who made this game decided long ago that I should be miserable and have to fight this stupid thing a grand total of 3 times. That is at least 2 times too many for my taste, and nearly all the effort to make the fight more exciting with later iterations fall completely flat, since giving him hands ruins the pace of the fight, and making him fly completely undoes everything that you were doing on ground level. The one tiny ray of light is Groose, whose enthusiasm and energy is like garnishing a plate of rotten dog food that you're being forced to eat again with a rasher of crispy bacon, and I just wish that the Imprisoned made me feel 1/10 as excited as whenever Groose is on screen. I don't need to be bounced around by his weird toes and their massive shockwaves. I have dreams, Skyward Sword! Let me achieve them! You will struggle to find a Zelda game as unforgiving as Zelda 2. It's definitely a product of its time, both in the way that it doesn't feel like traditional Zelda, and also how much this game relishes using you as a punching bag. You know, because Zelda games are usually a lot more reasonable with their difficulty, but I gotta say, you'd have to look far and wide to find an area as brutal as Death Mountain. I know it's called that for a reason, and if it was called Easy Mountain or Walk in the Park, I'd have different expectations, but my god, what the hell happened here? Arguably, it's not even the hardest area in Zelda 2, since the last dungeon can be very challenging and pretty goddamn confusing to navigate, but given that Death Mountain is sandwiched between the first and second dungeons, you'd imagine that it wouldn't be anything too crazy. Maybe something to ease you into the concept of the maze-like layout of later areas in Zelda 2, but nothing that you can't handle with your current abilities. What do you know? The point of Death Mountain is to find the hammer so you can break big rocks, but you can only find the hammer at the end of this sprawling maze that covers so many indoor areas full of enemies that are far stronger than anything you've faced until this point. The red Dyras especially, these axe throwing motherfuckers, they do so much damage and can't be blocked by your shield, so if you don't face them with a plan, you'll get overwhelmed easily. You can see Death Mountain as Zelda 2 laying its cards on the table nice and early and removing any facade of it being an easygoing video game, but for me this is a little too much for the second major area in a Zelda game. Imagine if you left the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild and as soon as you touched the ground, 200 Guardians started swarming at you. All this fuss just for me? You know what's surprising? Given how many dungeons have been made in all of the Zelda games, I've got to this point in this video and haven't felt the need to talk about any of them in any great depth. That's kinda surprising, given how integral they are to your enjoyment of a Zelda game, but maybe there just haven't been many truly awful Zelda dungeons? Hard to say for sure, but I will say that Phantom Hourglass got the complete wrong memo and coupled its few traditional dungeons with the Temple of the Ocean King. Yeah, remember how many times you had to come back to this place and how much of a slog it was to crawl through its repetitive stealth sections? Thank you! You shouldn't have. I'm not sure if this place was compromised during development, but surely this wasn't what Nintendo were going for. It's the place you come back to for your major story progression to pick up some kind of new map, and it does get reasonably exciting the closer you get to the bottom, but for such a long time, you'll be replaying the same half a dozen floors in the exact same way as before. In isolation, I like the idea of a stealth-based Zelda dungeon filled with enemies that you can't damage and can only avoid, but diminishing returns kicks in so quickly that my abiding memory of the Temple of the Waterman is one of frustration and boredom. I can count the number of genuinely boring dungeons in Zelda games on a couple of fingers, and none are as bad as this. D- for effort. If you've clicked on this video and you somehow don't know what the worst thing to ever come out with the Zelda name attached to is, then I envy the fact that I'm going to introduce the Zelda CDI games to your life right now. Oh yeah, I'm going to do it, and you're going to fucking love it. That's the curiosity with the CDI games though. Even though it's a sorry chapter of Zelda's history that Nintendo would rather forget about, you can't deny that these games have made life just that little bit sweeter. Anyway, the CDI games are the result of a rush deal with Philips to create video games that use Nintendo characters, but without a lot of input from key creatives and developers from Nintendo, which is just a perfect recipe for disaster, and I don't know how anyone expected these games to turn out any different. Do you know how much supervision Ubisoft had when they made Mario and Rabbids, and I'm sure Illumination had Miyamoto peering over their shoulder at every opportunity. Do you reckon they do this now after the CDI games? The games themselves are almost unbelievably terrible, plagued with terrible controls and wonky physics, and if it's not an awkward version of Zelda 2's side-on view, it's Zelda's adventure poorly replicating the top-down view of traditional Zelda. All three of these games play like utter shit, and perhaps the best way to experience the CDI games is to watch the cutscenes on YouTube? These are often cited as the only good part of these games, and the team of Russian animators that were brought in just to animate these scenes should be proud that their work still stands out as the one redeeming feature of the CDI games, albeit a little ironically. Still though, the overall package is a shocking low point for Zelda, and I imagine, or at least I'd hope, one that will never be beaten. Hey, if Nintendo are done with Tears of the Kingdom, I've got an idea for a sequel they could make. So yeah, those are the worst things in the Zelda games. Do you agree, or is there something that I've forgotten? Make sure you leave a comment and tell me down below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more in the future, and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. Last week, I think I ranked Resident Evil games. I am making these videos in advance. And I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including the Green Scorpion, Scott Riker, and Sarah Malion. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.